we're still talking to Kishore Mahbubani about the session that was televised live earlier on the aspirations of its inspirational Indonesia. Now, Kishore, if you can give us a general view on so far Jokowi and his administration's performance right now. I mean, if you can give your opinion.
Well, I think number one, he still remains an inspirational figure. Because the story of where he came from and from his humble beginnings, mayor of a small town, governor of Jakarta to the presidency, that's a very inspiring story. And what people forget is that it's stories like this lift the hopes of people at the bottom who say, hey, you know, I don't have to be the son of a major political figure. I don't have to be the son of a powerful figure to become the president of Indonesia. I can come from a humble background and become president of Indonesia. So that source of inspiration is, I think, very powerful. I think he's also been very well accepted by the leaders of other countries. You saw how well he did at the ASEAN meetings, G20 meetings, and he also came for the funeral of Mr. Lee Kuan Yew some weeks ago. But at the same time, it's also clear that he's running into some very strong political headwinds.
That's what I was going to ask you. Do you feel in your observation that Jokowi will be able to balance? He come from a business background, we know that.
Yes.
But politically and in terms of governance, does he have a good grip on what's ahead of him?
Well, I think to be fair to President Jokowi, he will have to go through a learning experience. And I think clearly he is becoming very clear that one of his handicaps is that he doesn't have a strong political party of his own that he's the leader of, you know, and that's obviously a challenge. So clearly he needs to develop a stronger political consensus within the parliament. I think it can be done. It's a question of being pragmatic. It's a question of making deals. It's a question of achieving win-win arrangements, and politicians have done it over time. So it is not an insoluble problem, but it does mean that whereas I think he wanted to focus on getting the right public policies, and as you know, he did the right thing by removing the fuel subsidies, for example. That was a positive development. He's now got to focus a bit more on the political side of the house.
Okay. Now earlier, let's go back to AEC as it's happening very soon. How do you observe Indonesia's readiness towards this open market?
I think.
How do you rate Indonesia?
I think I would say that Indonesia is slightly ambivalent about the virtues of the ASEAN economic community. And some Indonesians feel, maybe with some justification, that Indonesia is giving up more and getting less. Okay? Maybe that may be true in the short term, but you know, the critical thing that I think any Indonesian policymaker has to ask himself is, in the long run, Indonesia, to succeed and become a modern, developed country, has to develop the capacity to compete against the rest of the world.
Right.
Now, competing against the rest of the world is very difficult. So what you do is, before you go into the main swimming pool, you can swim in the baby pool. Now, competing within ASEAN economic community is like competing in a baby's pool.
It's a learning ground for Indonesia.
It's a learning pool. And you know, none of the, except for Singapore, none of the other ASEAN economies are really like Germany or Japan or Korea. It's not as though you're jumping in to swim against Germany or Japan or Korea. You're going to swim against Myanmar and Vietnam and Laos and Cambodia. And Singapore is too small to be a challenge for Indonesia. So if you cannot compete in the baby's pool, how can you compete in the big pool later on? Because eventually you have to compete in the big pool. Which is why the ASEAN countries are very wise in saying, let us compete among ourselves, create a larger market, we all become stronger, and then when we compete against the rest of the world, we are much stronger. So it is a stepping stone for Indonesia to become globally competitive. So Indonesia must not see the ASEAN Economic Community is the final destination. It's not the final destination. To succeed in its ultimate goal, it's got to compete globally. So it's a step towards competing globally.
Is it because there's a lack of information, there's a lack of discussion that, as Mr. Budi Sadikin pointed out earlier, that this discussion is still on intellectual, political and decision makers level, and it hasn't trickled down to the entrepreneurs, the grassroots. Is it one of the main issues that Indonesia could be facing?
I completely agree with Pak Budi that one of the failures of the ASEAN leaders is that they have failed to explain the importance and significance of the ASEAN project to the man in the street or the woman in the street. And I think that's something that needs to be done, because I think, you know, for example, you breathe oxygen, right? You don't see it, I don't see it.
Yeah.
But if this oxygen was not here, you and I would die.
Yeah.
Now, ASEAN is delivering oxygen to the ASEAN countries because it is delivering peace. Now, if there was no peace among the ASEAN countries, and if there was conflict or tension, you couldn't have economic development. But you know, you can see wars, but you can never see peace, right? You see a picture of war, someone shooting each other, but people don't shoot each other, you don't see the picture. So that's what ASEAN has delivered. ASEAN has delivered some very valuable oxygen that is enabling the ASEAN countries to thrive, but the ASEAN leaders haven't explained that to the people on the ground, and I see that as a great weakness of ASEAN.
So it's
that's why I'm producing a book on ASEAN this year.
Oh, good luck on that. So it's why it's interesting when you say you're not referring just to Indonesia, but you're referring to other Southeast Asian nations that they're not doing. It's a uniform issue right now.
Yes, I think that's true of Singapore.
Yeah.
I think many in Singapore take ASEAN for granted. It's true of Malaysia. Malaysia is worried about its automobile industry. Can Proton compete in ASEAN Economic Community? Thailand is also worried about ASEAN. So all the other countries are also equally worried. But it's a question of explaining to the people that in the long run we will all be stronger and better off together.
If
you open the ASEAN Economic Community even wider.
I like it, Kishore. We'll continue our discussion on the future of Indonesia after this short break.